Ladies and gentlemen, this is David Mirikitani with another episode of Weighing In. We're brought to you by USA Wrestling, the national governing body for wrestling in the United States, and sponsored by Nike Wrestling. Go to athleteps.com for all of your Nike and USA Wrestling branded gear. I'm here with my good friend Grant Turner. Mark Ostrander got called into work. I'm going to start out by saying the opinions that we express today are those of Grant Turner and David Mirikitani, not those of USA Wrestling, not those of Grandview Wrestling, and not those of Nike Wrestling, because we are going to talk some NIL stuff. GT, happy 4th. Good to see you, brother.
Happy 4th, my friend. Glad to be back from the holiday weekend.
For sure. Back to the grind. It's 2 weeks, week and a half till Fargo. I'll start by saying my dad and I are going to coach there together. It's the first time we've ever coached in Fargo together, so he's excited. I'm excited to travel with the Samurai, and 8 days of bunking. Either he's going to keep me as his son or I'm going to be out of the will. One of the two. So let's talk a couple things before we get in NIL. Number one, Ed Ruth to Illinois. Mike Poeta gets his guy. It's Ed's obviously fantastic wrestler, 3-time national champ. Kind of got lost in that David Taylor era where, he actually went, was a 3-timer, unbelievable on top. Did some MMA, was at North Carolina State. I'm always interested in how some of these guys can translate what they were really good at to the guys they coach, like an AJ Shop on top, like certain guys at scrambling, certain guys at bottom work, like I'd say like a Surtsis on bottom with the short sit series. When you heard Ed Ruth, Illinois, what'd you think?
I think it's great. I think it's, once again, it's Ed Ruth he's the man. I mean, as far as a competitor, I've never really seen him as in a coaching role because he's always kind of been a competitor. So yeah. I'm very excited to see his influence as a coach on those athletes while still young enough to, wrestle and scrap with those guys on a daily basis. So I know that he's got a ton of technique. He's been under some great tutelage from, his wrestling career. So I think it's a really, really solid fit for Illinois. And I think, Poeta is going to utilize him a ton in recruiting. I think he's going to use him a ton as showing technique. Once again, also another, mentor piece because Ed Ruth made a world team. So, like the transition from collegiate to international, pretty dang good.
Yeah, and you got to recruit kids that want to be good nationally and internationally because those are the guys that win national titles almost by accident. We've already seen how well Poeta's done on the recruiting trail just since he started. He got Webster. He got the name slips him with that other kid that we talked about. I think Christian Carroll was his name.
Carroll, yeah.
Yeah. So 2 hammers in that class of 23. Everything Poeta told me, Jeremy Hunter is drank from the fountain of youth. Like he's still wrestling with guys every day. So they got 3 coaches that can still, at the very least, spar with kids, which is good. I think when you're in good enough shape to spar, it's a different feel in learning what a guy's doing right or wrong, or a girl or woman's doing right or wrong. Like Lee Pritz tells me he spars with Kayla, at Forest all the time, and it helps them, be able to coach them better than instead of just watching it. So big pickup for Illinois. Obviously stays in the Big Ten. Ruth does. And, I think everybody's trying to figure out that Penn State pixie dust too. So, and then Ruth was at the front end of that. He and Taylor were kind of the guys that got that whole thing started.
Yeah, I think Taylor basically convinced Ed to stay, because, they had like Bubba Jenkins and, like Quentin Wright and, Frank. All those guys that I think would have been in like Frank Molinaro. That would have been like 2011, 12, 13 maybe for Ed.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, once again, those were pretty prolific Penn State teams that won titles, when David started coming in and, on the tail end of some of those other guys that were part of those great Penn State teams.
Yeah.
Great.
Him and Taylor were like 3 guys taken first or second with so many bonus points. That was scary that you just chalk those 2 guys up for like 55 points. It was nuts. So second thing, rule changes. Okay. So I'm not going to read through the rules, but here's the basic gist of it. They can make sure the scoreboard is right, the clock is right. Okay, so they've got some things there like what happened in the 149 match with Heil and Llewellyn, where they said they aren't allowed to correct it, even though obviously everybody saw time ran off. So they're allowed to just, there's 6 or 7 bullet points on how they can fix that. That's a good rule. I mean, I don't think anybody would vote against that rule. But here's the other one, not a but. Overtime. The committee has recommended changing the first sudden victory overtime to 2 minutes. Currently, both the first and second ones are 1 minute. With this proposal, the second period would remain at 1 minute. In addition to the time change, we recommend one of the wrestlers may be declared the winner after the completion of the 2 30-second tiebreaker / rideouts, is what we call it, if either of the wrestler has at least 1 second of advantage time. Which one you want to talk about first? 2 minutes versus 1 minute, or 1 second of riding time? Because they're both fascinating to me.
Let's go with the first one there.
2 minutes versus 1 minute.
What is it? The 2 minute?
Yeah.
2 minutes. 2 minutes versus 1 minute. Okay.
I'll tell you what I think. You jump in. I think that when it was 1 minute, if you knew you were good at riding, like let's say you're better on your feet than I am, but like I'm a good legger, I'm a good spiral guy, or hypothetically I'm a foot taller and I can just, claw you up. I just stall. They're not going to call stalling in overtime. As long as I don't get stepped out, they're not going to call it if I just sort of engage. 2 minutes is an eternity to just engage, And then the other thing was, let's say that I'm like, I don't really ride, so I just kind of kick you loose, and then you ride me for 10 seconds. Well, before I had another minute on my feet and then another 30 to figure it out. Now I got to ride for everything I'm worth. So I think how you coach guys and how you wrestle is dramatically different. And I think you'll see more guys late in overtime if they know they're tired, go for stuff, because they're like, I'm not going to make it through that 2 minute first overtime. I think you'll see less overtime matches because of that.
True. Yeah, I think there's a lot of tactical advantages, tactical disadvantages, depending upon what style of wrestling that you have. So it'll be interesting to see how people are coached up on it. And once again, this is a league of replication. So as soon as somebody tries to figure out something, and all of a sudden it's like, hey, we should be doing that. And then everyone tries to replicate maybe what Tom and Terry Brands come up with for that scenario. It's like, okay, well, everybody from the University of Iowa figured it out. They got some great wrestling minds over there. They figured it out. That's what we're going to do as a program. And then all of a sudden, Penn State comes out and does something different. Or, John Smith and his staff decide, hey, we're gonna train our kids this way. It was very similar to, like the 4-point near fall that came out. Guys that were really good on top got even better on top. And then the guys that could get better on top really wanted to get better on top because they could take a match away real quick.
Well, you mentioned Tom and Terry first. And when you said that, immediately the rules adjustment I thought of was that first year where the step out rule was called. And I believe that was the same year they wrestled at the football stadium when they had the dual meet with Oklahoma State. And Iowa, when Oklahoma State was on bottom, they'd come to their feet. Iowa would run them to the edge, let the guy get away, and then shoot him right off, and then get a stalling warning. Like they knew they weren't going to ride him that long anyway, but they got that extra stalling warning, which is going to make a difference the next period when they picked out. And John and his staff were going crazy, Espo and those guys, but it's like that was the rule at the time. Now people are like, they call more action, but what you realize if you're the guy going out about getting up is, man, if you get up, you got to be ready to circle and probably circle to that guy's back leg right away because a shot or something's coming on. And so, like you said, people always coach to the rules, right? People always coach to the rules. I think it'll actually shorten matches, because I think there'll be more scoring in that 2 minute overtime. And I certainly think the only way really for it to be tied realistically is for you to ride me for 30 and then me ride you for 30. Because if you ride me for 14 seconds, I promise you somebody's throwing a brick if they don't think the clock started too early or too late or the riding time, all that other stuff. So it's going to be super interesting. You obviously are still coaching college. I'm sure once the season starts, I'll be picking your brain off the air on what you and Nick Mitchell and your crew are kicking around, because I'm sure there are scenarios I'm sure you're going to play with it in practice, right?
Yeah, I mean, once again, we'll play with it, but it really comes down to how it's going to be called. It's the same thing with the out of bounds, action versus stalling. And once again, if you pick your brain of, the local officials that you work with, they will give you, an idea of what they're going to look for. And then once again, it comes into like variables at tournaments. So maybe how is it really being called? How is it really being, I just go back to like the drop down rule or the stalling call rule on the out of bounds. It was very subjective, and a lot of guys, either missed it for a majority of the season, which then we got used to it. And then at the national tournament, it became strict and by the rule book. So
right.
it's to, once again, watch and see, but you have to be engaged and ask the right questions to understand, like, hey, how is this going to be called? How is this going to work? How is this going to actually be implemented in, duels, tournaments, whatever. So.
Well, and NAIs and JUCOs, which I have much love for JUCOs, you guys tend to wrestle, and we did more open tournaments, because you're trying to wrestle those D1 schools. You're trying to also see, like, it's good for you guys to go to a JUCO tournament because you can see who you might want to recruit. So you're more likely to get more matches early in the season, which is just by pure math, you're probably going to get more overtime matches. And nobody ever likes to lose a match, but if you're going to lose one, lose it as early as possible and figure out why, right? And so I think that'll be something that benefits you guys as well. You said something that I've done more in my role as USA Wrestling, which is picking referees' brains. Like, I got to sit with the referees at the finals at a couple different events. Most recently, junior duels, like I'm in the booth, and like whenever there's a problem, like the referees like bring them over, and shout out to Lewis Baker, one of the best referees I know, one of the best people I know. He's a great follow on social. He's always posting positive things, mentality stuff. And, I would ask him, like, why'd you guys call this? Or, what was the challenge? Why was that a good challenge? Why was that a bad challenge? Obviously off the record, like, wow, it was a dumb challenge. He would never say it that way, but like, hey, that challenge never really had a chance because of this. That helps me be a better coach when I go to Fargo next week. That helps me go, don't throw the brick now, or throw the brick now. And so I think your point about talking to referees and really understanding it, the best referees don't want to decide the match, right? They just want to call the points and get out of the way and just be a wrestling fan with a really good eye for the sport. So those people are going to help you guys, you college coaches, a ton, I think.
Yeah, I think for me personally, like when I was a younger coach, I got in trouble a lot because I was hot-headed and I was just like, no, that's wrong. And like, I wanted to challenge everything. And like, I'm challenging
the socks.
Like, that's a low-cut singlet. I'm doing I'm doing all the things wrong when I was like a rookie or a first-year coach. And like, of course, then over time, like I understood a little bit more of like the process. And now once again, you're competitive, but that competitive spirit doesn't go anywhere. It's still there, but you have to be very smart about how you frame your questions, or once again, take 5 minutes, then go find another official. Don't talk to the guy that was in the center, because he don't want to talk to you, because you probably said you probably made him mad. So go find somebody else, maybe go to the head table, or go find a national team coach like Gary Mayab, or go find Steiner or Lindland.
Zach Dominguez and Greco, those kind of guys,
and pick those guys' brains, or somebody that's got a little bit more of perspective. It's always a good option, and rather than like following the official to their car and be like, hey man, like I want these answers. It's like time and a place, man. Can't do it that way.
Yeah, it's funny. I remember one time, the first year, and we'll get to NIL, but our guy threw a guy out of bounds. Our guy's toes were still in. This was the first year of the rule of anything in is in. And we had him on his back, and they blew it out of bounds. And so it was been at least 2 and probably 4 or 5 back then. And I walk over to the head table, and the referee just does this, like with his face down, goes, Coach, I missed it. And I just turn right back around. And my dad goes, what'd he say? I go, he said he missed it. He goes, I go, it's over. He can't, like, I can go over and berate him. He admitted he's wrong. Like, I frankly think it helps us the rest of this match. If there's another 50-50 call, we might get it, because he knows he missed one for us. So yeah, those are all lessons you learn as you age and mature. So we all do that in different clips or rates. So, okay. Yep. The subject that I'm probably the most fascinated about, besides just wrestling, is NIL. For those that didn't watch or listen last week, name, image, likeness. What this means, we are recording this on July 6th, the day after the holiday day, which 2 days after the 4th, obviously. So it's after July 1st. People can now make deals. Athletes can now make deals. And what this means is that they can sell their name, image, and likeness and be financially compensated for it. We could go into all the history of how we got here, Supreme Court rulings. Jason Keck was on Matt Chat and broke that down. He's going to do some more for us in the next day or two, the legal side of it, all those other things. So I'll go first. I think it's good for athletes. I think it's, my point was, like in football, where there's any 85 full rides, if you're Trevor Lawrence and I'm the third string kicker at Clemson, we're on the same scholarship. That doesn't seem fair to me. Clearly, like Trevor Lawrence just signed a $36 million NFL contract. He didn't go from being worth, quote, room and board, tuition, room and board, which is 50, 60 G's, to 36 million. He was worth that much last year and just couldn't get paid for it. So one of the things that I said, I was at a barbecue yesterday with my parents. I said, kids are getting paid. Kids are getting paid, is just they're not being paid above the table. This is going to allow kids to be paid above the table. Like now, if I really want you to come to Grandview and, I'm an alumni of Grandview and I own the XYZ painting company or an accounting company or car dealership, I can pay you to be there. Like the most, I think the one that caught the most publicity was Ferrari signed with Nearfall Clothing. He'd been wearing their stuff for years, and now he's wearing their stuff, and they made some deal. I'll ask you to put either your Grant Turner hat on or your Nike hat on first, in whichever order you want. This is something I'm sure you've been inundated with for months leading up to this. For people that don't know, you are the Nike guy in the United States for wrestling. I'm not saying that because you're my friend or to pump up your ego. That's just it. If you want to talk to Nike Wrestling, we start with Grant Turner. And then depending on what needs to happen, 80 to 90% of the time it ends with Grant Turner. The other 10 to 20% of the time it gets escalated up. So as that guy, as that background for people to understand who you are, that you're not like selling shoes out of the back of your car, okay? Because It's going to be a huge disservice to how important you are to the wrestling community. Just, I want to pick your brain, man. What do you think?
Well, I think the biggest thing, well, first and foremost, I want to make sure that I clear the table on things. I definitely agree that athletes should be paid and compensated for their name, image, and likeness through the collegiate ranks. I think it's a great day for athletes across the nation for them to, make whatever it is that they want to be able to make. Now, once again, there is going to be some haves and have-nots, people that have, really good followings, either really good athletes that, make a name for themselves, either before college, during college, after college, right? So I think that is all really great. I think it's a big step forward. I think over the course of the past 50 years, I think athletes have deserved this for a lot longer than we've been able to do it, right? So I think that's the biggest thing that I wanted to convey first. I think now the implementation and how this actually works is going to be the Wild West. And I don't know because the NCAA is not going to govern these particular NILs. I think, a lot of universities have gone to, hiring agencies or even having their own internal business office people and compliance people helping these athletes determine their worth or, market analysis for what they can receive or what they may be, allowed to be able to do. I think there's just so much unknowns for a lot of these athletes. Like what does it mean to be signed by particular brand or company? And yeah, you're seeing it a lot on, Twitter, Instagram, RBY, Gable Stevenson, Spencer Lee, all these people are getting signed by Barstool Athletics.
Yes.
Barstool Athletics still doesn't know what it means. They're signing people, but I don't know what that actually means. Or if they're like, hey, Barstool athlete David Mirikitani, we make a post about you, does that mean you get product? Does that mean you have?
Right.
I just think that there's so much to these conversations. And I don't think that you've seen a lot of, I would say, major brands step in and wade in quite yet. Just because I think that there's a lot to be discussed first.
Silence is intelligence in that case, I think, right?
Well, I think also, once again, you want to be first. Nobody wants to be second to the top of Mount Everest. Just nobody wants to be second. Nobody wants to be third. Nobody wants to be fourth. But you also don't want to, step on a whole bunch of landmines on your way there. So I think the biggest thing too is also, in my opinion, as Grant Turner, is the athlete is the most important thing.
Yeah.
So their livelihood, their contract, their monetary investment, all of the things that basically you want to do and protect the athlete and be able to try to make the best deal for them as possible, you have to respect that. You don't rush into things and then, potentially ruin someone's, eligibility or, financial ability to make money or whatever it may be, right? So you have to be very cautious of those type of things when you're speaking to athletes. And I think now, 5-6 days in, athletes are understanding their power, their worth a little bit more, but I think we still don't know what that means for them. And I think only time will tell, like, what is actually going to transpire with these guys. And I think we haven't even got into like what the school will approve. Is there, a monetary value that they can or cannot receive? Because a lot of these athletes can go viral in, like a performance. Like all of a sudden you have Trevor Lawrence, we'll use him as an example. Trevor Lawrence goes for 13 touchdowns, 7 passing, 6 rushing against Alabama. All of a sudden his social media following goes through the roof because on college game day on Saturday night, he goes into Tuscaloosa and does that. You bet your bottom dollar that he's going to have another 200,000 fans or another
million followers. Yeah.
Like everybody in Alabama is just gonna be like, well, I don't really like that guy anymore because he came in and bumped the crap out of our team. But, it's going to be interesting to see how that plays, because right now there's not a lot of sports going on for the collegiate athletes. I know that the College World Series just got over.
A dead period, but there's something that comes
period for nothing is really happening for these guys.
One thing. So this is where I think is fascinating. Olympics. Okay. Because you've got a lot of athletes. I wrote down about 6 things you said, and I'm going to try to hit them and then get out of your way again. But first of all, let's start with this. The NCAA is doing this to save their own rear ends. Okay. They're doing this to try to keep their structure alive. So all these people that are making $250,000 a year to be the vice president of shuffling paper, so those people don't lose their jobs. Okay. It is an extremely inefficient setup where they've been benefiting off the backs of athletes, and a lot of those athletes are poor and minority for years. It is a bad optical look for what's going on. Okay. And that's my opinion. That's not the opinion of USA Wrestling, but you look at the revenue sports. Second thing is this: they only care about 2 or 3 sports, revenue sports, which is football and men's basketball and maybe some other sport. And so wrestling, field hockey, crew, all these other sports are just getting the same rules applied to them. But these rules are not designed for wrestling. They're designed to keep football and basketball from going completely off the ranch and basically divorcing themselves from the NCAA. Football already did that with the BCS system, where they're not splitting that money now. If they lose the NCAA basketball tournament, The NCAA is done. They're done. And so what the NCAA said was, we're going to have to pay these athletes one way or another. First, we're going to try to stop it in the Supreme Court. Then we're going to get voted 9-0. Now we got to figure out a way to pay them without us paying them. So we're going to do that by letting other people pay. And we're not going to govern it, because if we govern it, then eventually they're going to go, why the hell do we need the NCAA? That's number one. Number two is, just so people know, there's a lot of schools that are already teaching classes on this. There are already schools putting out Twitter, IG, Facebook posts saying, we support our athletes' right to do this. I would encourage anybody. I'm literally a finance, business, economics major. I would encourage more and more kids, if you think you're going to be good, to understand that stuff. That's always been the case for these pro athletes. A lot of them don't have great educations. They get these handlers. These handlers take their money. They invest it in stuff you've never heard of, and then they're broke. 10 years later, they're broke. They made $3 million, $10 million, and they're broke. You mentioned Barstool Athletics. I want to circle back to that, because these people signed. Did they get a signing bonus, or did they just sign away their rights to negotiate anything? And is that a good or bad deal for them? And obviously time will tell. The non-Olympic, the non-revenue athletes, like I was listening to ESPN, they were talking about, I think it was a hurdler in Kentucky who's a girl or woman, excuse me, and she has like 400,000 Twitter followers. That's awesome, because before, those are the people that aren't getting full rides, or if they are, they're not getting a poker chip slipped in with their hamburger and fries, you know, at the local diner. And now she can make money. I think that's where wrestling is going to benefit. A lot of these kids aren't going to get $1 million deals, but they're going to get an extra $5,000 or $10,000. You and I went to college. $5,000 or $10,000 in college is a gigantic sum of money. Like, you know, I mean, most of us were broke when we went to college. So like, to not have to eat the meal plan every single time. And most of these sports, these athletes don't cut weight. So if they're like 4 pounds heavier than they were the day before, that's fine, right? So that's a huge thing. And then I think the Olympics, perfect example of what you were talking about, like the gymnastics Olympic trials were just here in St. Louis. Shout out to my guy, Chris Roseman from the Sports Commission, for crushing it after putting up with partial capacity for the D1s in St. Louis. Some of those athletes are in college, right? Especially like the men's team tends to be a little older than the women's team. The women's team tends to be a lot of high school age young ladies. But if you're in college and you go to XYZ college and you go now get, you go win a silver medal on the vault in the Olympics, you couldn't get paid on that before. And the school might go, look, it doesn't help us. Us giving you $50,000 doesn't really help us. You're not going anywhere. As long as we sign you to a scholarship, you can't really leave. Now they can leave, right? Like now you can transfer, but now Grant and Dave's Auto Shop can sponsor you. So whichever stuff you want to talk about, the NCAA saving themselves, people teaching classes, or we'll just focus on like the Olympic type stuff. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, I think there's just been a tidal wave of stuff that the NCAA has done. Basically, you know, once again, losing the Supreme Court, you know, case. And basically then having, I believe it's Justice Kavanaugh came out with a scathing, you know, one paragraph basically condemning what the NCAA has been doing with like antitrust law and, you know, some of those other things. And once again, I'm not a lawyer, don't claim to be a lawyer, have no like legal, you know, training or whatnot, but basically he made the case that, you know, all of these things, if it was in any other sort of business or, you know, way of life, that this would never have stood for as long as it has. And basically just kind of put them in their place, right? And then lo and behold, then state laws started coming out. Some people don't have anything on the books. Some were enacted on July 1st. So there's a lot to unpack with the NC2A. And then once again, washing their hands of all of it and just trying to keep their, you know, institutional control kind of afloat a little bit when it comes to maybe conferences, you know, NCAA basketball, whatever that may be. I think for some of these, the Olympians, where they have these ginormous platforms, let's say, for instance, like a Gabby Douglas, Sean Johnson, that were Olympians by the age of 13, 14, then they go on and get sponsorships after that. They were basically denied, they were professional athletes at that point. They can't go compete for like Oklahoma or Alabama within their own sport category and then get their own education.
It's
right?
an unbelievably good point. I forgot about that. Yes. Yeah. Sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead.
No, these are the type of what ifs that are always out there that maybe people don't necessarily think about from time to time, is, how world famous those athletes were. Nastia Luke and Gabby Doug. Using gymnastics as a point, because they were all underage athletes, minors, or, 17, 18 at the very oldest by the time that they were Olympians.
Yeah.
And then basically then not having to go into collegiate athletics because they're pros at that point. Thinking of all of the money that a 13, 14, 15, 16-year-old girl or boy could make while in that sport. So now having that access to those athletes by brands or something along those lines, I'm not sure how it would work with still being a minor. But if we're talking about the collegiate athletics, NIL, those athletes would then be able to go
yes,
probably into, collegiate athletics. And I don't quote me on that, but that would be where I would think that they could go now, because there is
You are right. Yeah.
Professional rank, right? So I was joking around with a gentleman, we were talking about this, is that Simone Biles, is going to go and be one of the greatest of all time
yes,
athletes, not let alone just gymnasts, but
yes,
athletes of all time. If I was any sort of person that had a gymnastics program, I would put Simone Biles on the roster at my institution as soon as she got back from Tokyo. Be like, hey,
right.
You know what? Would you like to go to Stanford?
Yes.
I'm like, oh, okay, yeah. I think I could probably take care of all of your tuition. That shouldn't be a problem. Anything that you could do to promote my program, either, come be on the roster, have school paid for, get your education somehow, some way. And then, trust me, the sponsors, she's already got the sponsors, right?
Simone Biles posted a picture in St. Louis with Emo's Pizza, which either people love or hate it, but it's a special kind of pizza here, like basically thin cardboard with Provel cheese. And people went crazy about it. People in St. Louis were retweeting it like crazy.
Yeah. Think about the power of that particular athlete on a college campus.
Yeah. With
any brand that you could possibly imagine. Like, hey, I really like this green taco truck outside of our practice facility. That place would be humming for the next week, right? Yeah. So I think that it's benefiting everybody around. I think businesses are finding ways to be profitable. It's not just throwing money at situations and saying, hey, I hope this works. I think there is an economic value to particular athletes. I think some of the major players will probably get paid a lot more than just your average starter. Maybe you're the starting wide receiver for South Carolina. What does that equate to? I don't know. Maybe some of those guys are way better than others. So not that athletes will there's just now the competition is extremely great for you to make your money with whatever brand that you're preferring to.
The cool thing though is the competition exists now, right? Like there's a couple other things that I saw real quickly, like in college basketball, some kids were just going straight to the G League, so because they have this rule where you can't go straight out of high school to the NBA. That was back in the LeBron days. And now some of these kids may not go to the G League because they can actually make more money pretending to go to college for 6 months. I love my mother. She's like literally the best human being I know, but she also has very much a heart of innocence. And I was explaining to her, Cam Newton turned down money to go to one school and then supposedly went to another school for free. Same thing with Zion Williamson, these guys each turned down over $100,000 from school X to go to school Y. If people think school Y paid nothing and school X offered them a bunch of money and they didn't go there, they didn't go for the education because Zion was one and done and he knew he was one and done. So why was it, right? Like 30 hours from a school is 30 hours from a school. You don't get to put that on your resume. Like I took college algebra at XYZ University. So, that's fascinating to me. I think what a lot of people do is, I've heard a lot of people say it's only going to affect the 1%, right? Like it's only going to affect the 1%. Well, I look at myself, like I was a 3-time state champ coming out of high school. I was ranked top 5 in the country in my weight class. I would have got something, I wasn't Henry Cejudo coming out of high school. Okay. But I was good. I mean, I was good, and I would have got something, and that might've just been enough to make it easier for my parents to not have to pay off my student loans. And that's not the story that's going to make the news, but one of the things is helping families do better and accumulate wealth and change things for generations to come. And if a kid can make more money earlier, and that can be to get a family from renting to buying. And once you've bought, if they can buy a house with no mortgage, now that's an asset that can be passed down from generation to generation. And it's easier to accumulate wealth when you don't have a house payment. These are all these things that it's trickle down. People hate the word trickle down economics, but the rich people are always going to figure out how to get paid. You just want the trickle to be as long and as deep as it can be so everybody benefits. The other thing is this, like in wrestling, there's 9.9 scholarships at the Division I level. I fully believe that this is going to allow schools to now fund like up to 20 kids at the big schools. The rules say the coaches and donors or alumni boosters cannot help the kid find a deal. That's impossible to enforce. That's just impossible to enforce. So if you're my coach let's pick a school that doesn't have wrestling, so we're not insinuating anything bad about anyone, at the University of Alabama, okay? I'm your coach. I'm older than you. We'll do that. And I'm like, Grant, you were the #1 guy in the country. You came out of a hotbed wrestling state like Iowa, and we know you decided not to stay in state. You came down here in Alabama to wrestle for us. I think you should go talk to Bill's Auto Dealership. I think they might be interested. You think that conversation was had on the recruiting trip? Like, I don't care what anybody said. These people know ahead of time. I always say, why in football, everybody's getting full rides. So why is it that the same 8 schools have all the best recruiting classes in the country? Because there's extra stuff. There has to be. All the facilities are unbelievable. You're not going somewhere because the weight room's better. It's how people's families are taken care of. And this is actually just a way to do it above board. So, I mean, not the last thing, but one of the things I do want to say is I see all these people like offering advice to kids on what to do. If people haven't studied law and haven't studied finance and how it works and have never negotiated a contract in their life, they probably shouldn't be giving advice. You should probably be talking to people that have done those things, because that's what matters. Like a contract can be a great contract. Like if somebody's to sign with Barstool and they said you get $100,000 a year no matter what, and then you get everything on top of that. Like if we negotiate a deal for you, we get the first $100,000 back, and then you get everything over the top. That's an amazing deal, depending on how long the contract's for. But if they go, yeah, we're going to pay you $20 and we're your agent, probably not a great deal, right? And if you don't know how to read a contract, like I think getting an accountant, getting a financial advisor, and getting a lawyer are the 3 things that these people need to get in probably in the wrong order. Probably need to get a lawyer first and a financial advisor second.
I was listening to a local radio show here in Iowa, and we were talking about, or they had been talking about, whether or not, what are these people going to be, either they're not going to be university employees because they can't be, like, it was something along the lines of they can't be university employees because, let's say, for instance, Dave, you're a university employee, you sign a deal with whatever, the university is managing your account or agency or whatever it may be. If you, for some reason, like get in a car accident and you lose your athletic ability, the conversation is that then the university and the state would be liable as a state, like a workman's comp, or you'd be entitled to benefits for the rest of your life as a state employee. So let's say you blow out your ACL and you're the starting basketball player and you were a state employee or getting paid through the state as, whatever, the University of Iowa starting point guard.
Yeah.
You basically claim workman's comp and then losses over that amount of time. The state would be on the hook for you to be able to be paid for that injury through the university forever.
Yeah.
And that's a very, very, very brief Cliff Notes version of what I had heard on the radio, but there was something to that effect where these guys are going to have to figure out how they're going to take their taxes, find out their accounting, find out all of the legal things that are going to occur with their contract, how it all plays out. All these athletes are going to get very savvy very quickly on how they're going to set up their own potential LLCs, whatever it may be, right? So I think there's so much to be learned, and we're in day 6 of NFL.
What's crazy is I've had 2 guys call me already, and I'm helping them set up their LLCs, like guys that I know. And, I'm just doing it because I'm friends with them. I mean, I think probably charging them some nominal amount of money so the advice is actually taken is probably a good idea. But a lot of this, if you've done it for a long time, is fairly it's fairly obvious, right? Like if you've coached a long time and you watch a kid, you can tell if he's got a good stance or not. Like if they don't have a good stance, that's probably where you need to start. One of the things that struck me, and we might even have to get into this next week because we haven't got into it a lot from like the Nike perspective, but like I watch the NBA and I can't remember which team, but one of them had like a wish.com logo on their jersey. And like on the strap or whatever you want to call it. One of them had, I think it's pronounced Rakuten or Rakuten, one of those online shopping stores.
Yep.
I could see entire teams like making deals. Like if I don't want to use wrestling guys because I don't want to bring anybody into it, well, let's say I'm Trevor Lawrence and I have 1 more year of eligibility. Maybe they go to a dealership and say, hey, for $500,000, you can put your logo on all of our jerseys and we're going to be on ABC and the ACC network and ESPN 12 times a year. And people are going to see wish.com as an example. And I think that's a way where the haves could help their have-not brothers and sisters, because they could split that money up either equally or proportionally. Maybe you're better than me, so you get more than me, but I at least get a little bit, and I mean, like you said, it's the Wild West. It's unregulated. I think here's the exciting thing. There's a potential to do a great deal of good, right? Like there's potential. And I think the one thing we wrestled, you're still coaching wrestling at the collegiate level. You're still helping athletes achieve their goals with your job. And I think if you didn't firmly believe in that, if I didn't firmly believe in that, we wouldn't be doing what we're doing. So in general, we think the good outweighs the bad. I mean, you just got to kind of make sure the snakes don't take over and that kids don't get away, people don't find another way to take advantage of these kids. But they, pure and simple, like I'm a business guy, these athletes were stifled. It's not fair. It's like, like I'm sure if you brought whatever the biggest soccer team in the world is to Nike that used to be with Adidas or Puma, I'm sure you'd get a bonus. And it wouldn't matter that you're the wrestling guy or not. Like if you know the right guy, or you could go get Ronaldo or Lionel Messi or somebody else who's a gigantic athlete over to Nike, you should get compensated. That's how the world works. We got like 2 minutes left. I'll let you have the last word.
I think, once again, we'll be able to get into this a little bit more as it continues to develop. But I think the biggest thing that I think both me and Dave have done a good job of articulating is it's great for the athletes. There's going to be more good than bad. There will be bad. There will be some people that maybe get taken advantage of or have some sort of bad contract, or they can't get out of their contract or something along those lines. But I think athletes in general now have some more power given back to them that had been never there before. So I think it's an exciting time to be a collegiate athlete. It's an exciting time to be an owner of anything that you want to be associated with college athletics. So it's going to be fun to see. It's going to be a lot of fun to watch. It's going to be awesome to sit back and watch the fireworks a little bit. But it's the Wild West, man. It really, truly is.
Couldn't have said it better myself. For Grant Turner, I'm David Mirikitani. Thanks as always for watching, listening, and sharing. We'll talk to you next week about Fargo and probably sneak peek of the Olympics. Thank you. God bless.